Get started. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Gandalf. Gandalf, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming on. So you're obviously one of the larger, albeit not exactly, I guess, known to normies, Bitcoin accounts that are out there. Obviously, there are like Bitcoin celebrities, people like Michael Saylor and Saifedean Moose and others. But Bitcoin is its own, enormous community, and you have a very large account dedicated to, the teaching of the gospel. And so I thought I'd have you on today, and we're going to get a little bit into Bitcoin just for the Hacking State project. So to get started, I think how did you get into it? Because I find that every Bitcoiner has sort of a unique, interesting story on how they got there.
Yeah, so the first time I can remember sort of seriously thinking about Bitcoin was in 2017. So I grew up in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for 25 years. And before getting into the Bitcoin space, I was a real estate agent. So I was a real estate broker. So I had a client that I was doing viewings with, and he was telling me about, this is like March 2017. So beginning of a bull market, or middle of that bull market. He is telling me how he is buying Bitcoin and Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera. And he was like a young, like, I think he was an ex-college football player, American football player, good looking, successful. So obviously, like, what he was talking about, I was like, oh, this guy's obviously smart and he's done well for himself, so he must know what he's talking about. I should look into this Bitcoin thing. So I sort of just made a note of it. I think I probably, Googled Bitcoin, read a few mainstream media articles, and then decided I had the mainstream media narrative in my head, which is like, it's a bubble, it has no intrinsic value, it's open source, anyone can just copy it. Like, how can it be worth? It's digital fake money. How can it be worth anything? And I sort of just like put it to the side, and I said, I'm going to watch what happens for a little bit. And of course, price shot up to like 20K and then went down to 3K. And I felt vindicated in my opinion that it was a bubble and that it was worthless. And then in 2019, I saw that the price went back up to 10K. And then I was like, okay, this can't be a bubble because it's gone back up to 10K. And if it's gone back up to 10K, which is halfway to the last all-time high, there must be something here that I'm not understanding. And so I should look into it some more. So I bought some in 2019 and really didn't pay any attention to it until the end of 2020.
And where was it at?
So, well, from June 2019, it was at 10K. I think it's sort of like traded in the 10 to 12Ks around there until COVID, where there was like there was a massive dump to, I think, maybe 3K. And when I started paying attention again, it was in the low 10s or 15K around there.
Nice. So you
Yeah,
were
I actually,
pretty happy with holding on.
I mean, yeah, but I was during the COVID bust and boom, I was on Wall Street bets and I was like buying Tesla shares and doing just others. I had the Bitcoin there and I was just like, I don't care about it. I'm not looking at it right now. Don't get it, but I'm definitely not selling. I'm just going to hold it until I have time to figure it out. And yeah, in my, buying shares and buying this and buying that and everything's going up, I was like, okay, I've kind of like run out of stocks that I like. So I need somewhere else to park some of my cash. Let me go look at the Bitcoin thing again. Because during that time I'd bought a company as well. So I had good income from that and I needed a place to park it. So it was more of just like, I've run out of stocks and I need to now go look at the Bitcoin thing. And once I watched a few, it was actually, I don't know how, I was in a 14-day hotel quarantine in Hong Kong because I'd flown to Scotland and then flown back to Hong Kong. I had to do 14 days quarantine. So I had all this time to kill. And that's where I sort of like just watched videos and listened to podcasts from Michael Saylor and Saifedean and whoever else, Andreas Antonopoulos, and kind of it started to click. And that's when I was like, started selling everything I owned and buying Bitcoin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a pretty interesting story regarding the sort of going from like a non-believer who's just sort of cynically in it as a bubble, and then the conversion, the final orange pill, as they say. I remember a similar experience. Mine came later. When was it? 2021. I think I really started. So I was panicking because I knew that, the money printing didn't make any sense. And similar to you, I was looking for a place to start parking cash. I didn't have a lot of cash, but I knew that it getting burned away in my bank account didn't make any sense. And so I started buying up a lot of Bitcoin in 2021. And then in 2022, I was traveling around Asia, and I was in the Philippines, which I wasn't actually even planning to go there originally, but I ended up there because I couldn't get into Vietnam. And when I was there, I was looking at the change in, first of all, the exchange rate for US dollars was great. But it was like, if you looked at the change, the amount of inflation that, the Philippine peso had experienced over the last 2 years, and compared it to the US dollar, it's like, oh, I'm afraid that the US dollar is going down in value. And this other foreign currency, like all these people that I'm meeting and talking to, the money that they're saving in is going down even faster because it's going down relative to the US dollar.
Yeah.
And so I was like, there's no way anybody that's saving in this local currency could possibly build wealth this way. It's completely insane. And so that's when the girl that I was dating at the time, I tried to convince her. I was like, you should convert as much of your savings into US dollars. And I was like, and I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think you should also put it into Bitcoin. And I was like, because if you keep it in this currency, like it's just never going to grow. Like it's never going to be worth anything. And I was working, I was doing sort of a digital nomad thing. I was working for a US company. And I was like, okay, I fell down the rabbit hole. Very similar thing. I had read Saifedean's book earlier that year, and then I started, just consuming as much like voracious amounts of Bitcoin content to try to, I guess solidify my worldview or get a handle on the intricacies of it. But yeah, and then since then, I've just been a permanent hodler.
The way to go.
Yeah, I'm always hodling. But you have sort of since gone from being a fellow hodler to actually working in the industry itself. So you work for a Bitcoin miner, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I work in the marketing team at a Bitcoin mining company called Brains.
Nice. And one of the things that I think people that are not maybe inside of the Bitcoin ecosystem don't really get is that like the Bitcoin, the mining is its own whole like sub industry, right? There's just, the investing, which anyone who wants to participate in the network can participate in, but the miners are crucial to actually running the network. And it's a pretty competitive industry. I'm here in Texas, and there's a bunch of Bitcoin miners here because of the friendly laws, and also the access to energy. But mining itself is like its own whole weird industry that has all kinds of like equilibrium and price management and economies of scale to worry about and things like that. So how did you get involved in mining?
So yeah, when I became obsessed with Bitcoin, I started this Twitter account, Bitcoin Gandalf, and I was actually in the process of selling my shares in the property business I owned. So I had all this time to basically just get to study Bitcoin, and I would spend like 12 hours a day. Twitter was kind of like where I spent most of the time, and then I'd see someone else. There's a new podcast out from this person, or I'd discover this person. I'd check out their book or their podcast or their whatever, right? So yeah, I was just lying in bed one day and I saw a post from and I would follow anyone that had Bitcoin in like their bio or talked about Bitcoin or worked in Bitcoin, instant follow. And I just saw I saw a tweet from someone at Brain saying they're looking for a like basically a social media intern. And
Hmm.
since I was like completely new to the industry, I was like, I apply. I was like, I'm spending all my day on Twitter anyway. I love Bitcoin. I'm gonna jump in here and see where it takes me. So I applied and got the job. And yeah, it was interesting. Mining was also one of the areas that, as a semi noob, I kind of didn't really understand. So it
Hmm.
was interesting for me to go into the mining space, uh, because not only is it like one of the biggest sectors of Bitcoin from a business perspective, um, but yeah, I didn't know that much about it, so it was an opportunity to learn as well.
Yeah, and it's also sort of the nexus of, I guess, the intersection of Bitcoin and like public policy. Like whenever you're hearing people talking about allowing Bitcoin, regulating Bitcoin, um, concerns about power usage, whether proof of work is even, good. They're usually talking about the miners, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, politicians and policymakers, they care a lot about jobs, right?
Mhm.
And bringing jobs to their state, or bringing, yeah. So, Bitcoin mining being one of the largest sectors of Bitcoin from a business perspective means that, there's economic activity there, and there's obviously jobs to be created and be had. So when, yeah, like you say, when it's very connected with politics because of that reason. So you have some people who's usually more left leaning, whose views are very much like Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment. We should get rid of it because it's polluting and whatever it's making it. And then there's the other people who are like, Bitcoin mining is good. It's bringing jobs to our state, and we should let it happen, and etc. So
Yeah, and so given that you're sort of part of the marketing team for this miner, I mean, what is the response to uh, people that are worried about its energy usage?
it's it's a value judgment, right? Saying that something is a waste of energy, it just means that you don't think it has any value, and henceforth anything that it uses up is a waste.
Hmm.
So I think it stems from a non-understanding of Bitcoin for the
Right,
most part. Of course have people who will be proponents of other consensus mechanisms like proof of stake and stuff like that. But for the 99.9% of people uh, who think it's a waste of energy are just parroting some mainstream media article that they've read.
right, right. So yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is, we discussed this in my interview with Grant Dever. That was, the miners are actually very good, depending on how their energy contracts are written, at helping to regulate and stabilize the grid in many cases. That's certainly the case here in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. I
So
mean, they I like to think of, or I like to say, Bitcoin miners are non-rival energy users, right? Bitcoin miners are very energy price sensitive, so
mhm.
they don't want to consume energy. They don't want to compete with you, who's willing to pay, whatever, 15 cents per kilowatt hour, or 20 cents per kilowatt hour, or in Europe, 35 cents per kilowatt hour to, have heating, hot water, power your computer, have some lights, and all that. They want dirt cheap energy that, that when or where no one else is using that energy.
Mhm.
So in the middle of the day, everyone's in the office, no one's at home, energy consumption is down, miners will turn on. At night, everyone's at home cooking, lights on, aircon on, miners can turn off. And they're very unique consumers of electricity in that way, that they can just turn on and off, uh, given the right economic circumstances as well. Of course, a miner can't just turn on for 1 hour a day, and unless they have a very sweet deal in terms of the incentive for turning off the other 23 hours of the day, because
Mhm.
otherwise it wouldn't be profitable to just mine for 1 hour a day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
One of the, going back to your previous question, one of the main
mm,
things that people should be asking themselves is, what does Bitcoin replace, and what is the energy usage of the system it replaces? I would say that Bitcoin as a system is much more energy efficient than the fiat system that encourages consumption. That, there's how many bankers in the world, how many banks in the world, how many offices full of people doing banking stuff in the world, how much cash is getting transported across the world all the time in cars, trucks, boats, trains, planes that are all burning fossil fuels, right? We all
Mm.
know that software not only makes everything better, but it makes it cheaper and more efficient.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is software that replaces a whole physical infrastructure of banking.
Yeah, well, this is a point that I found. I've talked to different people in the community who have differing opinions on Michael Saylor as a sort of evangelist. But one of the things he's very good at doing is emphasizing this point of like the digitization aspect and sort of the fundamental difference between taking something, you know, literal physical and then abstracting it into this, you know, virtual layer and the power that that gives you. So that's certainly you know, one of the bigger things. I was going to ask you though, would you consider yourself to be a maximalist?
Depends how you define maximalist.
Okay. So
I just don't like using I don't like using such broad groupings because it
uh
means so many different things to so many different people. If I think that Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that matters and that will be of significance, then yes, I'm a
okay.
maximalist. Yeah.
That's pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I mean,
if someone
I leave a, you know, I leave some room to be wrong for some other use case to be discovered. But as from the way I understand it,
mm,
uh, the only use of a blockchain is for money or for, well, yeah, I guess you can say for information, but money is sort of information. Uh, and the only point of using a blockchain is because you need something that's decentralized and immutable. If you have something centralized or that's not immutable, using a blockchain is just a less efficient way of doing something that where you could use a different kind of database, right? You're
mm,
using a blockchain, which is really bad at a lot of stuff because it
right.
has this one important quality. Well, because it allows you to be decentralized enough that it's immutable and, you know, doesn't require a central entity controlling everything.
Hmm. So just to like elucidate the point you're making a little bit more, because it's a somewhat subtle point. You're not saying that there aren't going to be like possible, you know, like I know I had a friend on earlier who's got like a crypto exchange. You know, they obviously have like a token for that exchange. There are obviously like different utility cases for lots of different cryptocurrencies. But your sort of broad point is it actually has to do with this sort of centralization, decentralization axis, and the way that Bitcoin has what they call the Immaculate Conception, right? Which is that Satoshi gave us this technology, gave it to the world, and there was no, you know, ICO or group of devs or anyone like that who got to have all of it right away and then disperse, you know, the rest to whoever.
Yeah, it wasn't trying. It was every cryptocurrency that came after Bitcoin was trying to say it could do something that Bitcoin couldn't do, but no one takes into account the trade-offs that are made for that thing to
Mm,
be. So Bitcoin has these like um, perfect set of trade-offs that allow it to be what it is. And if you mess with any of those, you break something essential that makes Bitcoin special, that makes Bitcoin unique, right? Um, so yeah, the other cryptos, whether they're immaculately concepted, you know, or not, or there's ICOs or not, they make certain trade-offs as well on it from a technical perspective and from a centralization perspective that Bitcoin doesn't make because Bitcoin chose the right. I don't know if you've ever played like you know, if you've ever played role-playing games or like FIFA where, you know, the characters or the players have attributes and it's like speed and this and that. And let's say you have
yeah.
100 points to give to each. You have 100 points. You have to distribute them between the different attributes, right? If you want to make the character faster, you have to take away from strength or something like that, right?
Mm,
It's the same with cryptocurrencies. There are some limitations, and if you change one thing, you give up something else somewhere else.
Right, right. So the design constraints for Bitcoin have been set up in such a way to sort of optimize. I mean, the way that I always talk about it is that it's sort of optimized for security, and if you're optimizing for security over everything else, then there are just certain things that you're not going to be able to do with it that you can do with other coins, but you don't have that reassurance that what you're dealing with is absolutely rock solid at the bottom, and
Yeah,
that's
and I mean, with exchange tokens and stuff like that, there's always been, there's always been loyalty points. The exchange tokens are kind of like a loyalty point scheme, right? You don't need a decentralized blockchain for that because there's a company behind it anyway in the first place.
Mhm.
So it doesn't need to be immutable. It doesn't, in fact, it's probably worse that you don't want some things to be immutable. You don't want the deed to your house, your ownership of your house to be immutable. Whereas if you lose the keys, you suddenly don't own your house anymore, right? You want to be able to go to a centralized place and get a new deed that shows you own your house.
And do you believe that Bitcoin will supplant existing global currencies as well?
I think it would be good if it did, but I don't know that it will.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I see it a little bit like the sort of battle between like open source software and closed source software, right? Or like the battle between like centralized social media and decentralized social media.
Mm.
One of the disadvantages of being decentralized is that it's very hard to coordinate to achieve a goal, right? So it just has to be inherently a lot better. It has to solve a real world problem for it to be adopted and used, right? Chat GPT comes out, and that obviously has very high utility. And suddenly you have 100 million people using Chat GPT every day, right? The same thing is not true for Bitcoin. And that's because other currencies serve enough of a purpose for those people that they don't need to switch yet, right?
Mm.
But
But
I see. So I see. We were talking about foreign currencies before. The
yeah.
U.S. dollar is kind of like the Bitcoin for all the other foreign currency holders in the world, right? They're trying
Right.
to get rid of their Philippine peso and Mexican peso and whatever else, and get U.S. dollars. And then the people who get that the U.S. dollar is just the same thing as those currencies, but because all those will collapse into the US dollar, that gives it a little bit more strength. But effectively, it's the same thing. It's a printable currency. Few people control it, and they can decide if they can, they can make more and make your dollars worth less, right? So people that realize that go to Bitcoin. So everyone else goes into the USD, and the smart USD holders, well, actually, every USD holder goes into some sort of asset. No one's hoarding like hundreds of millions of dollars of cash,
Right.
right? They're buying real estate, they're buying stocks, they're buying Bitcoin or some other, whatever, art, wines, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
At some point, cars were going up in value as you could buy a
Bonds.
car, drive it for 10,000 miles and then sell it for more.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, I mean, obviously with the US as a world reserve currency, I guess I'm imagining a scenario where one of the things that happens over time is there appears to be, widespread currency consolidation. So actually, like the number of currencies there are now in the world, as opposed to even 50 years ago, has actually gone down. And that's because a lot of currencies have disappeared because they've been mismanaged or they've just gone on the US dollar. Lots of countries have done that already. And I expect that trend to basically continue and for these networks to get more and more consolidated. And the world that I'm imagining is a world where there's like the US dollar and there's, um, the yuan and some others. Like there's a handful, the euro, of large currencies and Bitcoin also as its own, large network. And obviously the Bitcoin network isn't, um, you know, a super giant share of the global currency trade, but it's growing and it's already bigger than a lot of small countries.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with you. I think we'll see less currencies over time. Hopefully, we'll see Bitcoin grow its share of the sort of its market share of the global currency, um, of the global currencies. And yeah, I
Mm.
think we'll see like we'll probably have like a communist fiat, like the RMB or something like that,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
we'll have like the freedom fiat, like a USD or whatever euro, if you can call Europe free, and then we'll have like I think truly free currency, which is Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. Um, do do you think a little about privacy concerns with regard to, the Bitcoin network? I know that was something that people have gone back and forth about. Um, you know,
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult these days because it always seems like to get more privacy, you have to trade off convenience. And
mm,
convenience is a very strong driver of behavior. So while most individuals will not feel or are not currently feeling the risks of a lack of privacy, so they're willing to trade it off for for convenience. I think we'll have to see some event that impacts a mass number of people that's privacy related, uh, that drives people towards more privacy. And I'm not down that rabbit. I did go down the privacy rabbit hole for a while, but I'm not like super versed in it. And so I wonder whether it is possible to be more private and also have the convenience that you're now giving up.
yeah. Well, and also one of the other things, just independent of privacy. I mean, I don't use, as far as I know, like super anonymous tokens, Tornado Cash or anything like that. I think a lot of that stuff's actually illegal in the US.
Yeah, like
But
Monero and Zcash. Who knows how private? I don't know enough about them. Like who, I think the like sort of meme with Monero is like you can't audit it's so private you can't even audit the supply. You don't know if like there's more Moneros being minted than there is
yeah,
right now.
yeah,
I don't know enough about it though.
yeah, it's too opaque. So I guess one of the things though to think about is that's sort of related to privacy, but it's not quite there, is just having autonomy, right, over it in terms of custodial, um, and hot, cold wallets,
Mm.
keeping things off of exchanges, so on and so forth. What's your like personal philosophy on that?
I mean, Bitcoin is digital bearer cash. So
Mm,
and you don't even have to call it digital bearer cash because cash is inherently a bearer instrument. If you put it in the bank, it's no longer cash. It's
right.
now numbers on a bank spreadsheet.
Mm.
So if we just call it digital cash, uh, if you don't hold the keys to your Bitcoin, it's the equivalent of putting your cash in the bank.
Okay, but most people would say putting my cash in the bank isn't that bad, unless I have $100 million in the bank, then maybe that's a
Correct. And
problem.
most people will put their Bitcoin on an exchange.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I sort of get why. Uh, Grasping the concept of like self custody and you know the keys, being able to sign for your Bitcoin with your own keys. No, very few. Again, it comes down to like, is there an actual problem with putting money in a bank? For most people, no. Most people can put their money in a bank and then they want to send it to someone, they can, and they want to withdraw it and they can, right? It's only the day where they go to make a transaction and the bank's like, sorry, that's not possible. You can't do that. Or sorry, we're closing your bank account because of you're a risky customer for whatever reason, for the way you live your life. You get
Hmm.
shut down. And then it's like, oh, okay, now
Yeah,
there's a problem.
we saw
What's the
you at a
solution?
protest. You've been debanked.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I
exactly. We saw
remember
you.
watching that at the happened to the Canadian truckers. Uh,
Canadian trucker. Like, there's two ways, back onto like the freedom thing. There's two ways that the state can sort of enforce their will upon you. One is they restrict your physical freedoms, and the other one is that they restrict your financial freedoms.
hmm, right, right. And so if you've got your Bitcoin sitting on a cold wallet, um, then it's pretty hard to restrict your financial freedom if you've
Yeah,
got
they have
significant
to. You
savings.
make it a lot harder. But it's like, what's the saying? It's like possession is 9/10 of the law or something, right?
Hmm.
If
Yeah.
you have the Bitcoin in your possession, forget the law. Like they have to come and literally take it from you physically. Whereas if they can just press a button from a room in Washington and close your bank account in where you live in Washington, I'm talking Washington D.C. and let's say you live in Wyoming, they can just press one button and freeze your bank account.
Hmm. Right. So, do you keep all of your savings in Bitcoin?
Most of it, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
most of
I'm
it.
I'm likewise, which I think normal people hearing that think is crazy. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not worried about an 80% drop anytime soon. I know that those happen and they're coming. But I'm expecting, at least in the short to medium term for it to get back up to the all-time high.
Yeah, the same rules of, being financially sensible apply whether you're buying a house or saving in Bitcoin or buying some stocks. Like, everything can change in an instant in Bitcoin and in everything else. And so if you need access to liquidity, you shouldn't rely on your long-term savings for that. Right.
Yeah.
You gotta have it's good to have a buffer of 3 to 6 months of something liquid, cash or whatever else. And then it's nice to have a vehicle where you can put your money and you don't need to touch it for 5 or 10 years, and where you have a belief that it's going to increase in purchasing power over that time.
So you're a pretty financially savvy guy. And I just thought I'd take the opportunity to ask you, what is the deal with the Bitcoin like ETFs?
So you do you want to know if I'm for or against them, or?
Well, no, I still don't really understand why I would ever want one.
Yeah, I mean, again, you get Bitcoin. You seem like a guy who would be able to buy Bitcoin somewhere already and, self custody or keep it on an exchange. But yeah, you don't have a need for a Bitcoin ETF. But somebody who, a boomer that has no idea what Bitcoin is, but they just want to partake in the number go up, and they have their Schwab account or whatever. They don't know what Coinbase is. They don't, they only use a smartphone to SMS their wife and kids and make phone calls. They can go on their existing or even they still call their broker. They still have like a guy they call on the phone, like, "Hey Bobby, buy me 500 shares of Microsoft." Like, those guys, that's for them. And it's
Okay.
for some institutions that need, it's for also for institutions that perhaps need, someone that's helping. They need like a name like BlackRock behind the Bitcoin that's, that meets certain regulatory or compliance requirements for them to be able to get exposure to Bitcoin, right? I mean, imagine that most institutions can't just like go on Coinbase, smash buy 50 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoin, and then just like keep it in a Trezor in their office.
Right.
Doesn't fit with the corporate governance of a lot of
Exactly.
institutions. They'll need like a third party, even if I think most institutions, they need third party custodians, like for conflict of interest reasons and just like safety reasons. So it's going to be the same thing with Bitcoin. They're not going to get the benefit of the self custodial part of the digital cash. They don't care about that. They care about number go up.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting. So obviously, like, I'm always happy to hear when a large institution gets involved in Bitcoin. Like Tesla or someone like that is buying a bunch of Bitcoin. I'm always like, that's great. Like, it's great for the network. It's great for the value of my Bitcoin. It's also great for just the legitimacy angle of it. But one of the things that's interesting is that when a whale, so to speak, makes a purchase like that, they actually have to make them. Often they will try to make them over the course of like several days or a week even, so that there's no visible effect on the market.
Yeah.
They don't want people to, catch on that they're buying $50 million of Bitcoin. And so I always find that funny.
Yeah, yep. They'll have some algorithm that's buying, whatever, $2,000 every second for however long until they've stacked their whole thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
some anarchists or like Bitcoin purists will argue that a BlackRock ETF is it's not good for Bitcoin, or they'd rather it doesn't happen. That custodial exchanges are bad for Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm not that concerned about large players getting involved. I mean, I guess, yeah, ultimately there will be consolidation in the network over time, and there will be some centralization as a result of that. I mean, I think there already is, like, the total number of, like, if you look at the distribution of like total Bitcoin that's sitting in wallets and the amount that's in, the top, whatever, 5%, it's quite large. But again, it's sort of like centralization compared to what, right? Like, what else is more decentralized? Nothing.
Yeah. I think the concern might be for some people is that if an institution like BlackRock became a holder of enough Bitcoin and became influential enough that their opinion or whether they held or sold Bitcoin would affect the price to the point where you would go along with a change they proposed that you might have not gone along with, just based on the fact that they're so influential and could tank the price. Right? If it all became about, if the majority of Bitcoin activity was this actually through the ETF, the vehicle of ETFs, and then they decided, well, like Bitcoin uses too much energy. We want to make Bitcoin more environmentally friendly. And so we need to switch Bitcoin to proof of stake. And there was sort of another like block size war, but it would be a fork war of consensus mechanisms. And BlackRock was like, we support the POS fork. Right. And then that was the one where most of the money followed that fork. The proof of work fork could be like the Bitcoin Cash, could be worth a lot less. And so you might get a lot of people who would go with the POS fork because they're like, well, I don't want to lose my life savings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I also like the subtlety of POS as a fork.
Yeah.
The branding of that. It's not so good.
It's great. No, it's great. You would, of course, get tokens. You would, as a Bitcoin holder, you would get tokens in both, right?
Yeah.
But one of the ways you sort of vote for the one that you think is the good one is by selling the other one.
Well, and that's why more of us, individual hodlers need to, stay in the network, right?
Yeah, I think you have to hold, you have to run a node. And when I say hold, I mean in self-custody and run a node. And mine if you can.
And
right.
I guess I would ask you a little bit briefly about the economics of mining. I know that it's like it can get, at least here, it can be somewhat cutthroat in that there's like very intense competition, and the margins can be quite tight. And obviously this is good if you're a Bitcoiner, because that means that the miners themselves are getting more competitive. But is mining still even viable under a certain scale?
I think it's like anything. The circumstances dictate who can mine, and also because there's competition. It's like, can you set up a burger place next to McDonald's and beat McDonald's, or will McDonald's outcompete you? Right, because they can offer a cheaper burger or whatever it is, right? It's the same thing with mining. Everyone can mine, everyone can plug in a miner, but it is an economically driven game. So you're not going to really plug in a miner and lose money. There has to be some like second, if you are losing money, you have to be gaining back some value in some other way. Like, let's say you use a miner, you plug in a miner at home. Miners produce heat as a byproduct of the computing process. So let's say like your miner uses 1500 watts of electricity, and your space heater that doesn't mine Bitcoin also uses 1500 watts. You might calculate and mine at a loss, because then you're also getting the heat that you'd be spending money on anyway. But in terms of like the setting up profitable on their own mining operations, you're competing with institutional players who can go to the grid and say, hey, we'll buy up 250 megawatts or whatever, and they can get cheap prices and all of that, right? Whereas like, if you can't do that, they're going to be adding hash rate. They're going to be making the Bitcoin mining difficulty they're going to make Bitcoin mining difficulty go up. And if you're not adding hash rate in proportion to that, you're mining less Bitcoin every time that happens.
Right.
And they have access to capital markets, like cheaper capital, more capital than you. They get first dibs on miners.
Better miners. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So it is a cutthroat game. And look, just kind of like any business, there's only so much like optimization and stuff that you can do. With other stuff, you can sort of like create the perception that your thing delivers infinite value. But with Bitcoin, there's only, electricity can only go to zero. And Bitcoin price is not going to go to, it's not infinity either, right? Because those are the two kind of functions of Bitcoin mining. It's the electricity price and the Bitcoin price, right? Because your essentially spending money on electricity, and then you're turning that electricity into Bitcoin, and then you're normally, because you have expenses to pay, you're turning some of that Bitcoin into fiat, or paying for the expenses directly in Bitcoin, and then you keep the difference, right? So what some miners do though is they sell equity, they issue new shares, or they issue debt, and they hodl the Bitcoin,
Hmm.
and that's usually how they get wrecked. If
So,
they do that, if they're very irresponsible, if they do the equivalent of going 100x long with the capital raising abilities they have, they
mhm.
do end up getting wrecked.
Yeah, yeah. So, I guess I wanted to transition a little bit into talking about Bitcoin itself as a community, right? Because you've sort of thrown yourself into this. It's now your career, and that came out of your participation in like Bitcoin Twitter, right? And then I had the um, you know, whatever. I had my bit signal out for quite a while, and was sort of there. I took it. I don't know. I took it down because a friend was like, "Oh, it's cringe for you to be doing that," and I was like, "Well,
What's
but
your bit
it's true.
signal?
But it's true." Oh, just the hashtag Bitcoin little Twitter thing
Right.
that they have there, the emoji, and
Gotcha.
um, that was just there as a permanent fixture on my profile for a while,
Mm.
and um, I don't know how much it contributed to much of anything, but uh, the thing I was going to ask is like one of the things that Bitcoin gets criticized for, outside of environmental concerns and people having disputes about the validity of the currency and all that other sort of more fundamental stuff, is the community itself gets criticized. And I asked you earlier whether you consider yourself a maximalist, and sort of part of the hesitation in answering that question that people have, and I've been asked it a bunch of times too, is you don't want to be perceived as one of those people who um, is aggressive or just very vitriolic in terms of their
Mhm.
representation of Bitcoin. And so one of the negative things about Bitcoin, insofar as there are things to criticize, is that there is a small subset of the community that's perceived as being very aggressive and very rude. Um, and so I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your experience has been as someone who's grown a community, online around Bitcoin, and has turned that into his profession.
Yeah, I mean every it's first of all, it's the internet, and we add on anonymity on top of it, and the ability to only communicate in 280 characters in writing. uh it makes nuance difficult. It makes it very easy to be very short, snappy, emotional, angry sometimes. But every community has its trolls and its aggressive people, especially on the internet. Meeting people in real life, I've never met anyone that was like rude to me or behaved like they would on the like some people do on the internet. um and I also think that the whole thing is like sort of a storm in a fishbowl, because your average so-called no coiner, the person that has read a BBC News article about Bitcoin and has made up their mind that it's a bubble and it's bad for the environment and it's only used by criminals, they don't even know that there is a Bitcoin community. Never mind that like there are some people that are toxic or mean to them or mean to people. So I think it's only within people who are sort of tuned into the community that you get these sort of remarks about like, oh, toxic Bitcoin maximalist, or they're mean on the internet, or they say all this, they're really aggressive or whatever.
Hmm.
I mean, look at politics. Like I don't really pay attention to news and stuff, but I bet if you go under any sort of political post, you'll have people supporting Trump and people supporting Biden and people supporting this person and all being mean to each other.
Well, one of the things that I found is interesting whenever that criticism comes up is, I actually view it almost as like exactly the opposite. At least my interaction with other with fellow Bitcoiners, like yourself and others, is that there's something about Bitcoin that to me I think is extremely healthy once you understand what it's about. And by healthy, I just mean that like it's fundamentally a movement around people that don't want corruption of the currency and view corruption of the currency as destructive to civilization itself. And I think once you sort of wrap your head around that idea, then it becomes clear that like all of the other Bitcoiners that you interact with are on your side, not only because you're both invested in the network, but also because you all have the same shared vision of what could we do if we actually got the currency like correct, and how good could life be. And so to me, I find the community itself to be extremely like inspiring and very wholesome in a way.
Yeah, it's the cliche is like the Matrix, right? And they're out of the Matrix, and that is true. Once you understand how certain things work, you see the world completely in a different light. And the people who don't see that, they're sort of, you kind of see them living in an illusion, and those two worlds clash, right? And I think a lot of the response to, yeah, a lot of the people being mean, Bitcoin is being mean to other people. Some of it is warranted in the sense that these other people are saying some very incorrect, moronic things about Bitcoin, right? That are just factually wrong. And they don't, they haven't taken the time to learn about Bitcoin, but yet they hold very strong opinions. So I think it's completely fair to defend yourself against those types of comments, or accusations, or whatever else.
Yeah, I remember I had on my old show Agora Politics, I had an interview with Jim Rutt. He's the former CEO of Network Solutions, which is a big domain registrar. And I asked him about Bitcoin because we were talking about sort of network states and other things like that. And he gave me a ridiculous answer. Which by the way, if Jim Rutt, if this ever gets around to him, I'd be happy to talk to him again. Hopefully he's changed his mind on Bitcoin. But he basically said, what you said earlier, which is like, Bitcoin's basically only for criminals. But he also said that he thought that the proof of work mechanism and the scarcity that's built into Bitcoin, like automatically, was evil. And I was not I was not like extremely orange pilled at the time, but I was definitely pro Bitcoin. And because it wasn't really germane to the particular conversation we were having, I didn't press him very far on it, but I wish I would have, because in a way, I view it almost as exactly the inverse. Like without the scarcity component, that's how you get something that's corrupting. And it's actually the illusion that reality doesn't have scarcity in it, that you create through some fiat mechanism that leads to, the proliferation of evil.
Yeah, you get a lot of this point of view that, without the ability to expand the money supply, all these terrible things would happen. But I think those people don't believe that expanding the money supply devalues the existing currency units. So there is no actual like wealth creation or expansion of capital goods or the stock of capital and valuable things in the world. Those things don't increase by you just printing more money. Otherwise, why not just print infinite money?
You can't create wealth through dilution, guys.
Yeah, correctly. Exactly. So that, I think that's the missing like point that people who say that don't understand. I think that's where the like scarcity, deflationary money, like no one would ever spend any money, and then we're all, how can there be growth and finance, businesses trading with each other? Like, no, there will be that. There will most definitely still be trade, right? You won't go and buy a washing machine, every 2 years because a part of it has broken, because tomorrow it's going to be more expensive. Like you'll actually like probably, yes, you will, things will last longer because the money is so much more valuable. The money should be the most valuable thing that you have, and you should be very careful of what you trade for it. Whereas right now, especially in an inflationary environment, inflation encourages you to consume today because tomorrow you're going to need more dollars to buy the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And
But
again, it's I don't know.
you
Um,
still you people are still going to want a fancier car or whatever, and they will be willing to trade their money for those things because we're still humans with emotions that are driven by emotions, right? Driven
yeah,
by ego, driven by uh you know putting our self-worth into external things, the cars we drive, the houses, the Gucci, the whatever, that all still exist under a scarce money deflationary standard.
right, exactly. Um, it's just, you won't get diluted, and you don't have to park all your money into like real estate or tech stocks or something like that to just try to keep it from disappearing from your account.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that was the thing for me, at least, was like,
A lot
I
of
work,
things will return to their utility value.
yeah, like I work in tech, and I got laid off, actually almost a year ago today, and you know, I was part of like the initial wave of like tech layoffs. I was not working in big tech, but uh, basically, a large reason why over the last year there's been like a big, exodus of, uh, well, not even exodus. I don't think most people left the industry, but a lot of tech people got laid off. Had to do with people parking their money in tech and especially in big tech over the last 3 years because they didn't know where else to put it to get any returns that were beating inflation. It's like if real inflation is something like 15%, which it certainly was in some places, um, then you need 20% return or more to to be just getting ahead. And where are you going to get that? Well, there aren't a lot of places where you're going to get that consistently. And so it would be nice to have to not have that kind of inflationary concern, and so people can actually put their money into things that work, that are just solid businesses, and they're not just chasing unrealistic returns.
Yeah. It would be nice if the sort of like the 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 safe rate of return was just holding cash.
Right.
Like the equivalent of like treasuries was just cash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, holding Bitcoin, maybe as a
Exactly.
cash.
Yeah, that's what I would mean by cash.
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah.
So I guess for you, given that, like, at least in the Bitcoin like hype cycle trends, right? It seems like there are up cycles where people are getting very excited and a lot of energy is behind it. There's a lot of news coverage. And then there are sort of down cycles where people are saying that, look, we finally got them this time. Bitcoin's actually a scam. It's a pyramid scheme, whatever. And then there's sort of like this middle period, which I think we're sort of in right now. Maybe we're on the cusp of an upcycle, um, where there's just a large lull and the price is largely just going sideways. Um, and there's not a lot of activity because of that, because people don't get that excited. Like they get excited when the number goes up, and they get excited when the number goes down, because then we can all pontificate about why the number is moving in whatever direction. And
Yeah.
obviously, whenever it starts going back up, you get a bunch of people jumping in, and then many of them will stay, and many of them will also go off in attrition when the price goes back down eventually. So I wanted to ask you, like, what is your sense right now of sort of the phase that we're at in the kind of hype cycle, and what's like the perception of Bitcoin? Because I'm not like super into Bitcoin Twitter, obviously, in the way that someone like you is.
Yeah, I think people are definitely feeling quite bullish at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously no one knows what's going to happen in the future, but you could definitely, I think if you were a trader and you were into Bitcoin Twitter, you'd be able to trade based off what you feel your feed is. So like right now, if you're trading, you might be selling. And
Mhm.
then, obviously when the whole like FTX thing and everyone's like visibly bearish, you might be buying. So I think you could definitely trade off the feed of just the feed because it's like a global consciousness, right? You're seeing in real time the emotions and opinions and points of view about something in real time, and you have, thousands and thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of data points.
Right. Yeah, you could build
But
a Bitcoin trading algorithm that uses sentiment analysis from Twitter.
I mean, if you were like super techie and you could do that, then for sure, and you wanted to automate it. But if you're spending on that time on Twitter anyway because you enjoy it, there you can definitely tell when people are bullish and when people are bearish. And not to say that doesn't go up from here, and you selling here was bad. But yeah, you could trade off that, and yeah, people are definitely bullish. The ETF is the BlackRock ETF and all the other ETFs are a big thing. It'll be interesting to see whether it's a sell the news event. Often things in Bitcoin are sell the news events, like the big things, right? If you sold Bitcoin when Tesla announced they bought Bitcoin and it pumped to 44K, you'd be pretty happy right now.
Yeah.
Right. You might have been sad for like a few weeks when it went to 60K but you'd be pretty happy.
So do you trade at all? I mean, do you
No,
believe in selling? Yeah.
not at all. I believe in, and that's not to say that I think trading is bad and whatever. I'm sure there's a small sliver of people that can do it successfully and make money off it. Those people are not telling you their secrets of how they do it and selling you a course. I guarantee it. So they're just, it's like Coca-Cola selling you their secret syrup so that everyone else can make Coca-Cola. No, they don't do that. Right. That's why like intellectual property rights exist and secrets, exist and stuff like that. So I'm just personally not drawn. I don't enjoy trading. I prefer to learn other things and increase my income that way, and then just park it in Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean,
But by all means, if people enjoy trading and they're able to make money of doing it, I'm not against trading at all. Just not for me.
The way that I visualize it, and this started back in 2021 when I was initially trying to dump as much cash as possible into Bitcoin, is that I'm just like I need like as big of a shovel as possible to just move everything from the fiat economy into the Bitcoin economy. And that's like my entire goal is just get a bigger shovel. So it's like, I would never sell the Bitcoin unless I absolutely had to. Because all I'm trying to do is move as much energy from this part of the economy to this part.
Yeah. And for you said you're in the tech industry. I'm sure that you can stack a lot more Bitcoin in the long run if you focus on increasing your income or your earning potential in the thing that you're good at and enjoy and have experience in, than like going to try and trade or time the markets in Bitcoin and buy here, sell there, whatever, right? Unless that's what you enjoy and that's where you're going to be, focusing the majority of your time and energy, because you're competing against when you're doing anything. Sure, there's skill, but skill is largely a derivative of like how much time and effort you put into something.
Yeah, and that's also why I'm not a shitcoiner. Like I know a bunch of crypto degenerates that I met on Clubhouse who, they're always looking for some hint or some clue or some forum post about some new shitcoin, literal shitcoins. I'm not even saying everything is a shitcoin.
It's gambling plus astrology, right? There's like you can't gambling. Everyone knows it's just like math based. You can't be like, oh, I'm gonna predict that red is gonna land next, because we all know it's just like math statistics. With shitcoin, it can be like, oh, I heard that like Elon is gonna talk about Doge on SNL, so I can like bet on Doge. Or it's maybe like sports betting where like there's some semblance of you might be able to get an edge by some informational advantage. But again, it's largely just betting, gambling. It's not really investing.
Yeah. It's an entertainment activity, and for some of them, it works out. It's basically my view.
Again, yeah, exactly. The only problem I have with it is when the cryptocurrencies are affinity scamming Bitcoin, right? They're coming out and they're saying like a lot of people will just put all cryptocurrencies in sort of a bucket, and they're like, well, Solana's better because it can do faster transaction times and blah, 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 blah. And they don't understand, again, that Solana is, more centralized than Bitcoin. There's a Solana Foundation, their founders. There's all this stuff that Bitcoin doesn't have for a good reason.
So, for someone listening who maybe is not yet a Bitcoiner, but has a decent idea of like what Bitcoin is, they've been obviously This is, you and I are both pro Bitcoin. But how would you recommend somebody begin to get into the space?
So what really helped me is I obviously had I was that person that had read the BBC article and thought I was well informed as a result of reading the reliable and trustworthy mainstream media, right?
Yeah. Who
And
only
so
wants
what?
their best interest?
Yeah, exactly. My so what really helped me was actually going to content that specifically debunked misconceptions that were perpetuated by the media. So stuff like, 51% attacks, or, what if China, all the mining is in China, or like, is it bad for the environment, or is it only used by criminals? All the that has no intrinsic value, all that kind of stuff. There's a great podcast. So I don't know if some of your listeners might be familiar with Preston Pish. He does a podcast called Bitcoin. He was big in like the value investing space, so he's a huge like Warren Buffett fan, and he has another podcast called the Investors Podcast,
Mm.
where we study billionaires, and that arm of the podcast just talks about traditional investing and value investing and stuff like that. And then he got into Bitcoin, so he started just only doing the Bitcoin episodes of his podcast, and in the one of the first episodes, he has a guy called Robert Breedlove on, and
Yeah.
they sort of go through Bitcoin misconceptions. And that's a great one because they address all these like mainstream media points. There's another great video on YouTube that Simon Dixon and Andreas Antonopoulos, I believe, and it's called like "Why You Shouldn't Buy Bitcoin," and they basically again go through all these reasons that why Bitcoin is bad, and then debunk them. So those were super helpful. And then some of the earlier, I remember listening to an interview with Pomp and Michael Saylor and Raoul Pal before I realized that he's a bit of a farce, on Real Vision with Michael Saylor. And Michael Saylor's just like really good at using analogies that people who aren't necessarily into Bitcoin will understand. It's like once I understood that Bitcoin is not just like some fake internet money thing, that it's actually a network as well. And when he likened it to being like a social network, and Bitcoin being a money network, and how you can have a network effect in money and own
Mm.
a piece of that sort of network, right? By just owning the asset. That was a big like moment for me, because
Great.
I understood like investing in companies, and I understood why a company like Facebook might be a good investment from the fact that it has like network effects and what network effects were. So when you're
Yeah.
able to translate that into, you can own a piece of a monetary network,
Yeah.
that was big.
Yeah. So, yeah, recommend. I mean, that's an interesting position to just start immediately going after the misconceptions and the myths. Obviously, like there's no, I mean, start as simple as possible. Like get on Coinbase. It's not like illegal to to just have a small Coinbase, wallet and start toying around with like the very accessible forms of getting just interacting with it and holding on to some of it. And then I
Yeah.
think as your comfort level goes up and as you learn more, everyone can decide for themselves the level of commitment that makes sense for them as far as financial interest.
Yeah, it has to be commensurate with your understanding of it and your conviction in what you think is going to happen in the future, based on what you do understand. And the reason why I went for those, the misconception, myth busting podcasts and stuff, is because that's meeting people where they already are. Like they
Yeah.
will already have read some of these misconceptions in the mainstream media, because you talk to anyone about Bitcoin, they'll spout one of those things like, oh, I heard it's really bad for the environment, or I heard like it's really slow, it can only do 7 transactions per second, or something, right? So yeah, that's where I would hit them. And then of course they can go buy some. I mean, if you go on Coinbase to buy some Bitcoin, it's kind of like just going on a banking app or like a stock buying app. You're not really getting to understand like Bitcoin addresses, and you're not interacting with Bitcoin directly. But sure, it is an easy first step to acquiring some. And then I would say the next step would be like get your own wallet where you hold the keys and transfer the Bitcoin into that, and do some reading about the basics of how Bitcoin works. Start with the white paper. I mean, it's 9 pages from the guy who made it.
I read the white paper in 2012. If only I had taken it more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it wasn't to be taken seriously at that time. It was taken as seriously as like it deserved at the time, perhaps. But yeah, there were people who took it very seriously.
I do recommend reading the white paper. It's I know it's like somewhat intimidating if you're not a technical person, but it's worth reading, and it's not incomprehensible to someone.
No, there are snippets that you can get. And we all spend so much time trying to define what Bitcoin is, and I think Satoshi just called it, digital peer-to-peer cash or something.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what it is.
All right. Well, Bitcoin Gandalf, it has been great having you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
So thank you for having me. It's been great.